Okay.
Let's get together to co-create a breakthrough for freedom of energy, sustenance, healing, and regeneration of the human vessel. Welcome to FESIG, the Free Energy Special Interest Group, where science meets spirituality in the quest for truth and knowledge to free humanity and transform this planet into a paradise.
Right. So welcome everyone. Welcome to Physics 71st meeting. Today is the 4th of December, and this is our 71st Physics meeting. And we had just completed the first session where Dan Winter spoke. And now this is the second session where we are going to have Toby Grotz speaking. So I would like to share screen of the PowerPoint presentation so you can see the agenda of today's meeting. Right. If I were to scroll down a bit, you can see it. Right. So we have finished the first session. Dan was speaking about sacred geometry and all that stuff, which is so fascinating and interesting. And the second session, we have Toby Grotz presenting Bruce dePalma's discovery, the presentation that he did at the Global BAM 2019 at Amsterdam. Free energy, anti-gravity, space drive, and the future of science. And I just plugged this in because I just love this. It's take on the influence of Vedic philosophy on Nikola Tesla's work. So once we finish this, then we'll have a Q&A session, of course, you know, wrapping it up and all that. And then we can adjourn this meeting to the 72nd Physics meeting on the 8th of January 2020. And because the first Wednesday is New Year's Day. Right, so here we go. So I'm going to introduce Toby properly. Toby is, hang on a minute, let me just pull up his bio. Yeah. Right. Toby will be, of course, talking about breakthrough energy generators, how Bruce dePalma's discovery led to design and implement, led to the design and implementation of open unity systems. And this covers free energy, anti-gravity, space drive, and the future of science, and his take on the influence of Vedic philosophy and Nikola Tesla's work. Toby Grotz is an electrical engineer with a background in power systems design. He has designed electrical systems for coal, natural gas, and nuclear power plants. Mr. Grotz has been effectively managing projects in the energy and utility industry and researching alternative energy systems for 40 years. Work experience includes design and support for capital improvements for power plants rated up to 1,800 megawatts. Mr. Grotz has been involved on both sides of the energy equation, exploring for oil, gas, and geothermal resources using seismic and magnetotelluric methods, and working in the utility industry in coal, natural gas, and nuclear power plants, providing design and management of raw water systems for power plants. He has experience with the pumping, piping, and controls needed for large water supply systems. He also has recent experience working with research and production of probiotics and microbes for bioremediation, wastewater management, animal health, and aquaculture. And of course, if you go to physics site, you can click on Toby's scientific contributions. I put a link there for you to explore his work. So that's it, folks. Over to you, Toby.
Good afternoon. Glad everybody could be here. And I'd like to start off with a little bit different approach than what Crystal just read. I'll be going over some of dePalma's works and why I think that's important. But I think the most important thing for us to realize in this day and age is the ancient wisdom of the Vedas, and Crystal mentioned that, and that's been so important to me. And it's how I really got into this field to begin with. If I might be so bold, I think this is probably coming in backwards, but it's Bhagavad Gita as it is. And it was written by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. It's one of the first books that I got that led me to the Vedic sciences. And one thing I think is really important today that people are really missing. And I say that because I feel a mania. I feel people are just in crisis over what's happening and where we're going and what has gone on, and conspiracy theories surround us, and people have forgotten the basics of where we are. We're on Earth, which is halfway between heaven and hell. And this material world has had problems. It probably always will have problems. It comes in cycles, as suggested by descriptions of the yugas. But something I think people have forgotten today is what they are. What are we? How to identify? How do I self-identify? Am I a man? Am I a woman? Trans, cis, gay, LGBT, etc. And actually, we're none of that. We're spirit souls. And I'd like to just read something from chapter 6, verse 34 of the Bhagavad Gita. I'm picking up a little bit of distortion and a little bit of tweaks there.
Oh, I have just muted Eddie. Yeah, I've just muted. Go on then, Toby.
Okay, so yeah, chapter 6, text 34 of the Bhagavad Gita, as translated by Prabhupada. And I might add that my Sanskrit teacher, when I asked him, what's the best translation of the Bhagavad Gita? He said there isn't any. And so we just have to do the best we can, not understanding Sanskrit as our main root language. So the translation is, for the mind is restless, turbulent, obstinate, and very strong, O Krishna. And to subdue it is, it seems to me, more difficult than controlling the wind. Now, the explanation of that passage by Prabhupada was that the individual, who we are, what we are, soul being, the individual is the passenger in the car of the material body, and intelligence is the driver. Mind is the driving instrument, and the senses are the horses. The self is thus the enjoyer or sufferer in the association of the mind and senses. So it is understood by great thinkers. Intelligence is supposed to direct the mind, but the mind is so strong and obstinate that it often overcomes even one's own intelligence. And thus, we fail to see the ether, which is the basis for some of the work that we're doing in the free energy world. And I think the best explanation, the book actually that got me on this path, was Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. And I suggest that those of you who are with us today in this meeting, if you have not read Autobiography of a Yogi, it is an excellent place to start to understand the basic substrate of nature, because one has to understand the self and where we fit into the universe before we can start to pick apart the actual fabric of space to see how it works. And I think that the Vedas accurately describe the nature of space, and that's been my study of the Vedas. At one point, I came across Nikola Tesla's description, and that was on the back of Margaret Cheney's book, Man Out of Time. And he used the words prana and akash, and I thought to myself, why is this engineer, this genius, using Sanskrit terminology to describe the universe? I started looking into that, and of course discovered that he learned this information from a yogi that came to this country many years ago in the 1800s named Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda came before Yogananda. Yogananda came, I think, was 30s, early 40s. But Vivekananda was lecturing in New York City in the late 1880s, 90s, I forget the exact dates. And Tesla attended his lectures, along with Sarah Bernhardt, who was a great star of the stage at that time. And Tesla learned, I think, that what he had envisioned when he first had his revelation about how magnetic fields worked, which allowed him to invent the alternating current motor, my supposition is that his heightened state of awareness allowed him to see fields of energy that are described in the Vedas, and that when prana acts upon Akash, it causes the electron to form and it causes the material world to flow from that. So that impressed me quite considerably. And I began studying more explicitly those works, and that eventually led me to the works of Tiwari in India, who also published information and wrote a book called Spiritual Foundations concerning the influence of the Vedas on his life and on science. So that's kind of a little background. One thing I'd like to do is clear up some misconceptions people have about Tesla. You know, with the internet, the conspiracy theories are rife that Tesla was murdered and he died a pauper. And that's just not true. Tesla had a stipend from the Yugoslavian government because he was a national hero. So he was getting $9,000 a year, I believe it was at that time, in 1940 money. And he was living in an upscale hotel when he died. And he died of old age. If you look at pictures of Tesla just before he died, he was emaciated. And there was no conspiracy. And I had actually at one time met a man that was working with Tesla on behalf of the United States Army, going over Tesla's patents, because Tesla had volunteered all his information for the war effort. And Ralph Bergstresser was a captain in the United States Army, and he was over there the day before Tesla died, going through the patents. And Bergstresser told me, you know, there was no way that there was any skullduggery. There was no conspiracy to get rid of Tesla. People really weren't even paying attention to Tesla at that time. So those are the kind of things you have to watch out for, especially in the free energy movement. When you see stories about devices or people, I've always found that if you can't meet the person and talk to the person, you're not going to get the straight story. So it's best to get out there and visit them and talk to them and see what their side of the story is. I think that another book I'd like to bring to all of yours attention, if you really want to get the straight story about Tesla, you have to get a copy of Wizard. And Wizard is by Mark Cypher, and it is a definitive, fairly thick book about the life of Nikola Tesla. Mark presented in 1984 at the Tesla Centennial Symposium and turned his master's degree thesis into a great book. He's probably got the best historical references of any book ever written on Tesla. So get the book Wizard. It's a fascinating story, not just of what Tesla was doing, but of world history at the time in terms of financing, economics, and political intrigue in the United States in late 1800s and early 1900s. And as long as I'm talking about books, of course, this is the latest one by Gene Manning and Susan Manowich, Hidden Energy. And it's also a great reference as to the current state of the art, who's doing what in the free energy world. I started, am I coming through? Is my sound good? Yeah, Franz, am I doing well on my sound and video?
Yes, your sound's good, and please continue.
Okay, great. That's the electrical engineering me. Just want to check the instruments. I started in this field inspired by Tom Bearden. I went to a United States Psychotronics Association conference, USPA, which Dan Winter knows well. He's been quite involved with that group for many years. In 1980, I saw Tom Bearden speak, and I was so inspired because he gave a list of 32 things wrong with electrical engineering and physics theory. And I said to myself, God, no wonder I never understood it all that well in school. And so I got off on looking into what is this stuff about Tesla? What is this stuff about free energy? Can it be done? And have been doing it since 1980. Now, the point is not how long I've been doing it, but the point is that that's 2 generations ago. 2 generations ago, 20 years being a generation. And my feeling right now is that, oh my goodness, we're no closer to free energy devices than we were in 1980, 40 years ago. There are a lot of devices that have had very interesting effects and have been measured over unity, but nothing's been commercialized yet. And I think eventually, when there are courses that actually people study the evolution and history of free energy and they actually study the physics and theory of free energy, a lot of these devices we've seen in the last 40 years will be whole chapters and even whole books about that particular phenomenon and that particular device. I think in particular about the Testatica machine in Switzerland. Stefan Marinoff was a member of the commune there and took me to see the people there. I could not see the machine. By that time, they were not demonstrating it anymore. This was in the early 90s. But Stefan said that he was convinced it was free energy, and Stefan was one of the best physicists and experimenters, experimental tool and die makers to ever work on a free energy machine. His workmanship was incredible, and his experimentation and his mathematics are physics review D-level math. And he told me that when he put a load on that machine, i.e. Connected the output to a load, the machine didn't slow down. And if a machine doesn't slow down when you load it, you know something's going on. And this thing would sit there, run by itself, loaded, and put out power. The RQM was a machine that at one time, I think it was in Switzerland, got a lot of press. And I just saw in the SAFE, Swiss Energy Association newsletter, that there was a picture of the RQM once again. And I don't know, I don't read German, but perhaps that machine is still being worked on. I've got some other people coming in. Somebody's got to mute their mic. Okay, I think it's gone. When I'd like to talk, another thing I'd like to talk about is on the conspiracy level aspect of things. You heard my background. Like John Kliss said at the Global BEM conference, something that I had said several years ago, and it resonates so well. Both of us have been in the belly of the beast. We've worked in industries where they are making things that are not exactly good for the rest of the people on this planet. So we've seen how they work and how they operate. But I have to say, in all my travels around the world and in all my interactions with inventors, I have never seen any overt acts of suppression. My theory, after many years of looking at this, is that efficiency always wins in the marketplace. If you're making buggy whips at the time that the automobile industry is taking off, you're not going to be in the buggy whip business very long. So that is also reflected in a conversation that Hal Puthoff had with one of the vice presidents of ExxonMobil in Houston. Hal, of course, is a well-known physicist, Stanford University physicist, who's worked on testing for energy devices for many years. And when he explained zero-point energy to the vice president of the oil company, the guy said, well, hey, you know, if we got that, we'll put it in the refinery right now today, because if we don't have to use energy to make our product, we can make more money, pollute less. And we know that the oil isn't going to last forever. So he actually said, burning oil to run cars is like burning Van Goghs to heat our house. So these guys know that it's not going to last forever and we need another source. They're just waiting for it to happen and they'll utilize it. I think that the best way to solve emissions and reduce carbon dioxide emissions is to have devices, if we can get a free energy device big enough and large enough in the multi-megawatt range, the gigawatt range, 1,400 megawatts is a 1.4 gigawatt power plant. If we could replace those generators with free energy generators, we could power the grid without any carbon emissions. And that could solve the carbon emissions faster than building free energy devices for everybody to have in their house. So anyway, that's just kind of a systems engineering point of view, is what's the best way to go about this the fastest. And if I can share screens now, let me see if I can bring up my PowerPoint. Let's see. Switch over to, let me move that guy here. PowerPoint. Yes, okay. So can everybody see that PowerPoint?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to move the okay, there we go. Let's get over to here. Because what I want to talk about, one of the things I want to talk about is chirality. And I think that the person that solves the problem or the issue of chirality will probably get a Nobel Prize. Chirality describes the way that plants grow and the way they come out of the ground. And Tesla noticed that there was a plasma discharge in his Tesla bulbs. And this is like a plasma globe in which the plasma is slowly streaming from the center electrode to the outside of the globe. And he noticed that this was a clockwise rotation. And he theorized that in the southern hemisphere, it would also be clockwise, but I suspect not. And I'm looking for people to be interested in running this experiment. If we can recreate what Tesla did and observe the slow rotation of the arc from the center of the plasma all the way around the globe, perhaps we can start to get an understanding of why all of the amino acids required for life have a twist in the left-handed direction, and why climbing vines come out of the ground the same way on both sides of the equator. If I'm looking at the way a morning glory vine climbs, and I stand in the earth looking up, you'll see that it comes out clockwise out of the ground. And I immediately thought, well, south of the equator would have to come up the same way, otherwise there would be no climbing vines on the equator. So this has always fascinated me. As I hiked through the mountains, I would often see the trees that had fallen and the bark fell off and they all spiraled in the same direction. You can see coming out of the ground that this is a clockwise spiral. And of course, here we have a flower that always climbed in the clockwise direction. That's Datura, also known as Indian tobacco. So the proposed experiment would be to take the rotating plasma stream and look at it in the southern hemisphere as well as in the northern hemisphere. And perhaps without that $8 billion Large Hadron Collider, we can discover aspects of what's going on. And I think what's going on is that there is a rotational component of the ether around the Earth that causes that twist in nature. All DNA and all living things has the same type of twist. I'm stopping the share now, and let's see if I can get back out of here. So I recently was at the Microbe Museum in Amsterdam, and if you haven't been to the Microbe Museum in Amsterdam, it's a fascinating place. My interest was that I worked for a small company that was making probiotics for human health and animal health, and actually at one point found myself up to my waist in a manure pond at a dairy farm. We were using microbes to treat the manure because manure is such a problem in these large agricultural factory farms. And in that microbe museum, I asked one of the researchers there, why is all DNA in all plants and animals twist in the same direction? They don't know. And I think a Nobel Prize is in store for the person that figures that out. You can research and you will find many papers about the fact that chirality exists in nature. And they know why in terms of the chemical substances and the bonding of the molecules, but they don't know the mechanism that causes it. They don't know the root cause. And personally, I think that is a possible answer to, or a possible solution to using etheric engineering in health and healing that Dan had just been talking about. I think that the next thing I want to do is see if we can play this this video by Bruce dePalma, because I think it's really important to get an idea about his contribution and his insight. Bruce was an MIT graduate in electrical engineering, and he started looking at the mechanical equations involved in describing inertia, and he just didn't buy it. And he started doing some experiments that led him to the development of what he called the N machine. And it turns out the N machine, which is basically a Faraday motor, actually has no back torque when it's loaded. And he did numerous experiments to prove this. And it's defies explanation under standard physics. And so we're just going to have to let them deal with that. And the rest of us are going to go on utilizing that effect to work on our machines. So let me get back to sharing again.
Is there sound on the video?
Yes, there is.
Share computer sound also when you get up the sharing.
Okay, I'll pull my mic. That's correct. Let's see how that works. Okay.
Just in the bottom one, when you click the share screen, you have a share computer sound.
Are we ready to try that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what we get. Before that starts, I'll just say that this is an interview I did with him in 1994. And I did not realize it at the time, but I was sitting at the feet of a bodhisattva, a very advanced individual.
In machine, how did that terminology or that term come about? What does it stand for? Well, N means the nth degree.
Oh, we can say it, Toby.
My hot head that what I should call this thing.
Toby.
How did that terminology or that term come about? What does it stand for? Well, N means the nth degree.
Toby, we can't see the video. You have to start, click share it again.
I guess I can say this now. When something happens like this, like somebody coming up with a simple way of extracting energy from space, which will
Toby, we can see the video. We can see the video. You forgot to click share screen. The green screen at the bottom. You have to click share.
Oh, where's
Yeah, you have to click share and then click share again. And then we can see your video.
okay.
We can only hear it, but we can see it.
You can have your earphones on and so on. So
Yeah, I've got the earphones off. Okay.
you can have them on. Place them so and only
So
the
with Zoom, I click share.
yeah, and then you click before you share it in the bottom of the share window. You have,
and machine. How did that terminology?
now it's working.
It's working now?
Yeah.
Okay, let me back up. Sorry for that, folks.
No
All right,
problem.
don't worry. I'll
Yeah.
edit it.
You got the video now.
Mhm.
Let me just say that this was in 1994, and I did not realize it at the time. I realized it as I was preparing this presentation. I was in the presence of a very profoundly thoughtful and spiritual individual. And what he's about to say here, I will comment on after the video, the point that he reached where he realized what it was and what he had. So here we go. Let's just flag me if there's a problem.
That term come about? What does it stand for? Well, N means the nth degree. Because when it first came into my head that what I should call this thing, I guess I can say this now. When something happens like this, like somebody coming up with a simple way of extracting energy from space, which will transform society, or at least spark transformation of society from a consumptive to an outgoing, expanding situation. Very special times, like everything contracts down to a point and expands out from a point. Chardin, in his work about the future history of man, talks about this point. I believe there's a myth to free energy in that in any intelligent society, in any planet in the universe, when it reaches the point in its intellectual development where it can conceive that this is a possible principle, the same people, the same souls now are manifest to do the same job. So you have to say to yourself, why did I call it the end machine? Because it was so clear in my mind to call it the end machine that I didn't have to think about it. It just came, just like I knew it would never be dragged. I also knew I would call it the end machine because I knew that there were end things that would come out of this thing. That this would change our way of thinking, our way of living. This would take us into space, which is where I really think the human race is destined to go, providing a powerful spaceship with a non-consumpting or consumptive source of energy.
Okay, I'm back. Do I have audio?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I looked up the book Future of Man, and it turned out that my stepfather was Dutch, and he was raised by Jesuits, and on his bookshelf was The Future of Man by Teilhard de Chardin, and I had read that, it turned out, back when I was 14. And here he says, human species is evolving spiritually, progressing from a simple faith higher and higher forms of consciousness including the consciousness of God and culminating in the ultimate understanding of humankind's place and purpose in the universe. And this work was done, he had this idea in the 30s, 40s, and of course, the church was not at all interested in him sharing these ideas with the public at the time. But I think that as the New Age movement came along, as yoga was introduced to the West, more and more people began to understand what basically Bruce was talking about, that we're going to reach a zenith point. And I think that free energy is part of that evolution. And I'd like to bring up something here that I went into.
Toby, I don't mean to interrupt you. You forgot to put your headset on, so your voice is becoming distant.
Okay.
Right.
Am I back on?
Oh yes, that's a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, so leaving Kadam behind, and this concept that we're evolving into a more spiritually awakened state, you can see from the fact that when I was growing up, yoga was an unheard word, and now every minute of every day in every town in every country, somebody is doing yoga. And so it wasn't so long ago that yoga went from unknown to common. And actually Sanskrit words like avatar are common usage in our daily life today. So it didn't take long to make that jump. So the question is, are we ready for free energy? The concept I'd like to introduce next. And one of the things that I presented at the conference was this concept of Jevons paradox. Can you see that screen? Am I still there?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Jevons paradox was presented in a book that Jevons wrote about coal in 1866. And he found that Jevons paradox was that increased efficiency always leads to increased resource depletion and population growth. So every time you have a new thing, you consume more resources and you have more population growth. And so the question becomes, what will free energy do? And I pointed out that if you can see the cursor, I live in a little town in this area of Wisconsin, just below the Great Lakes, which hold 1/5 of the world's fresh water supply. And, this continent was so thick with trees that you could walk all day in the forest and never see the sun. And there is a place near the shores of Lake Superior that I just visited, which is ancient primal forest. It's been there since the last ice age. And you can walk all day and barely see the sun. Here's a little bit of sun coming through the canopy right here. So this entire region, the entire country, the entire United States was covered with this forest. And in this particular part of the world, in 10 years, they cut down every tree. And that's what it looked like 10 years later. So what are we going to do with free energy? We have a rainforest that's burning, and that's the result. And then the question is, if energy is free, if chainsaws and bulldozers don't need fuel, how many years will it take to cut it all? What will be the next big thing? So I'm back. I stopped my screen sharing. Am I still?
Oh yes.
Video's good.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is kind of the philosophic part of the whole free energy thing. I can sit down in my basement and make measurements, and I go around helping other inventors make measurements, and I do my own research trying to figure out how to use etheric energy. And we engineers and backyard inventors trade information back and forth. But the question is the consciousness ready for free energy? And most people think, And I went into this conference thinking that the consciousness had to be just right, that we had to evolve consciously before we could use free energy. And you know, I realized that when we learned how to control fire, where was our consciousness? Because what did we do with fire? We went out and used it to burn down other people's villages and steal their food. And then the next big thing was the wheel. And were we ready consciously for the wheel? Because we used the wheel and we put it on war chariots and became more efficient at war. And then we invented electricity, the next big thing. And we used electric motors and electricity to make airplanes that we used the next big thing, nuclear weapons, to put on that airplane and drop them. So we're never ready for the next big thing. You know, the consciousness, you know, to me, it's an enigma. And perhaps some of the viewers here can share their thoughts with me on this. Free energy will drop and we will get free energy. And I don't know when it's going to be, but apparently these developments don't depend on our level of consciousness, because these big things that were discovered all were used for negative as well as positive. And so as a whole, consciousness is never ready for the next development. And it's kind of a cosmic question as to when free energy will happen, but we don't have to wait for everybody to be consciously aware for this to happen, because we're never all going to be consciously aware. That these big things just drop, and it's beyond our intellectual capability to figure out when or why. So maybe with that, I could open it up to questions and comments. You know, if somebody has some questions more about Bruce dePalma or free energy or physics, I'm kind of a shade tree mechanic. I'm a backyard inventor. I'm a garage tinkerer. And so I'm not the theoretician, but I know how to hold the drill and turn a screwdriver. So maybe I can help anybody that's trying to do some research or trying to build some machinery as well.
Oh, you know, Toby, we have two proponents of the Vedic philosophy here in your audience today. And we have Professor Manisha from India. She purposely stay up awake in India just to attend this meeting. And then we have, of course, Swami. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami.
So, Dr. Manisha, Prof, do you want to say something about the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, and the Vivekananda's teachings, lectures in Chicago, you were saying? Prof. Manisha? You want to reconfirm what Toby was saying about Tesla having studied under Swami Vivekananda?
I don't see Manisha there. I just looked up on the screen.
Uh-huh.
But I will say, if you just Google Swami Vivekananda's lecture that he gave in Chicago, he actually gave, I think, 3 lectures. But his most famous lecture in Chicago is really incredible, because he stood up there and he read the assembled religions, the Riot Act, about why they can't practice what they preach, why they can't love each other, why they're always fighting. And he was quite a hit at the conference. He stunned them all, and got standing ovations. So it's worth all that you are participating. Look up Swami Vivekananda's lectures at the Chicago exhibition. It's quite worth the read.
I've been studying Yogananda Paramahansa teachings as well when I was young. I really love every bit of it. Toby, thank you. That's so good. Anyway, Dr. Manisha must have fallen asleep on the way.
Oh, there she is.
There she is.
Oh, Swami. Hey, Swami, you want to say something about this?
Well, I'd love to talk about this. However, I lost the feed, and it took me this long from the last session, and it took me this long to reestablish this and get back on this forum here. So, unfortunately, I missed most of what Toby was talking about. But yeah, we're in this great time of acceleration right now, and so
So
getting this information out there is so valuable. So
I
I
suppose
can't really say much more about it.
Tesla must have learned something about the flying vimanas of the Mahabharata from the Vedic philosophy to have invented this what do you call that, the flying saucer that he did, the spacecraft. What do you think, Toby?
I don't have any reference for that. I think, and I suspect maybe not. This is the book, Wizard. If you read Wizard, everything that Tesla worked on and knew about is presented here. And like I was saying, this book is by Mark Seifer, and well worth the read, because a lot of what people say on the internet just isn't true. It's just not backed up by the documents, including his car, that people think he had a free energy car. But one thing I will try to share screen again with, and I don't think I need, it won't be a video, so I think I can keep my mic connected. This is what we call power generation from the fifth element. And this was prepared by a man that was the executive director, no, excuse me, he was the technical director of the Karnataka Power Corporation, KPG. That's Melita Rao, and he is in the film Out of the Void, which is a film made about Tawari. So you can see that we have generated power from all these different elements: earth, water, fire, air. And what we have not learned to do is generate power from ether, the Akash. And so that is the direction that we're moving. The background to this video is artwork done by Walter Russell. If you Google philosophy.org, you will see the paintings and visionary drawings that Walter Russell did, which I believe are a visual description of the ether. And I think very, very well fit the descriptions of the ether, both in the Vedas and by other people. I think you can see in the background here, there's a pillow over here, and that's a symbol that I've seen around the world, but it's very much in evidence in the Native American tapestries, weavings, and beadwork. It's kind of a symbol of two vortexes coming together at the same time, two vortexes coming apart. The Navajo, so-called Navajo rugs have that particular pattern in them wherever you look, and I've found that pattern around the world. The ancients seem to know how the ether contributed to the formation of the physical universe, and I think it's my belief that that's expressed in the symbology of the ancients in many cultures around the world. Anybody else got to have a comment or a question?
I could say a little something here, because you were mentioning about flying saucers, UFOs, so on and so forth. Okay, one explanation of why it is that they suddenly appear and do phenomenal course changes that just defy our physical capabilities is that one explanation is that it's a projected thought form from a far distant place in the star system, galaxy, whatever, and it's sent here, and while it's here, it collects enough energy to materialize a temporary physical object. And so it's sort of like a remote camera, you know, that is just suddenly made. and then it zips around, collects all this data information. We're doing similar sort of thing by sending robots to Mars and the moon and this, that, and the other. You know, but that's on a comparatively lower tech scale, you know, than what these some of these flying UFOs, we call them, are. And so they just kind of appear, check everything out, do a recording, take samples, all that kind of stuff, and then just dissolve, for lack of better words, right? Because thought is faster than light, right? And so that kind of explains to me why it is that, you know, what are these flying saucer sort of things, phenomena. So, you know, it's just somebody checking us out, you know, just taking a lookity-boo and just kind of, you know, and yeah, so.
Yeah, that brings up a good point. It's in 1994, 93, December 93, I had the opportunity, I was tasked with going around the world and visiting inventors and researchers in preparation for the 1994 International Symposium on New Energy.
Oh.
And so here I am, an electrical engineer. We're trying to get the facts, trying to get the data. You know, let's just stick to the physics, right? So I'm visiting professor emeritus's, I'm visiting engineers, I'm visiting backyard inventors, and across the board, I sit down and I start talking to them, we start filming, and within a half an hour, we're talking about Atlantis and UFOs and paranormal phenomenon, just to a person. It's just kind of a, I just wanted to throw that out there that, you know, you can't have, it doesn't seem like you can have a straight conversation and just talk about physics and engineering, because anybody that's into this kind of work, eventually, their minds have been so open and stretched so far, all these other ideas come pouring in like Bigfoot. Well, I live in a part of the world where we have Bigfoot. And my impression, Swami, is that it's almost like they manifest in this for a little while and then they go back. There's like a phase, they're phasing in and phasing out. They're here for a little while, leave some evidence, and then they're gone. And it's like the UFOs, you know, people see stuff and these are trained observers and then it's gone. So what is all that about? It's all about consciousness and the fact that there's more than one reality.
Toby, I'm sorry, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag now for you. Huh?
Okay.
Remember when we were sitting down after the dinner at Global BAM 2019, and we started talking, and the conversation led to me questioning you, Toby, do you believe in UFOs, flying saucers? And then you were looking so interested and say, hey, believe it or not, I was president of the UFO Society. I was.
Yeah, the cat's out of the bag, Crystal. Thanks a lot. You know, I didn't have any credibility before this, so you know.
Yeah, it's good.
And you know, you can't find that on the internet until now, and it's in a video recording, so it won't be in print, because that happened so long ago that nobody can remember. It's not on, you know, it's not on the internet. There are really a lot of good things that happened that aren't on the internet.
But now you've got something to do with UFOs. You're a hero.
Well, you know, you get, sometimes you see things and you want to figure out what happened, and then you know, pretty soon, you know, somebody's got to do the job, and I don't know. It's a phenomenon.
I saw one in, I think, 1967. I was, back in those days, I used to go out and ride my bicycle every night for 2 hours out on the country roads. Eh? And so, in effect, what I was doing is I was doing deep yoga breathing.
Sure.
Right? And so, by doing that kind of pumping cycle breathing, what was happening was I was supercharging my body, supercharging my mind, my consciousness, chakras, the whole bit, right? I didn't have teacher in those, there weren't teachers around in those days. You know? So anyway, so one of these nights, I'm out there riding my bicycle, and I'm out in an area that the roads are every half mile. It's like a big forest, block area sort of thing. And so it's just these big blocks of forest with roads going through on a half mile grid sort of thing at most. And I just saw this thing all of a sudden just kind of appear, and it looked like a harvest moon, wrong time of year, wrong position of the sky, and it was just hovering there, and it looked to be like it had kind of arms sticking out of it, gantry things or whatever like that. And I figured it was about maybe 5 miles away from where I was. But while I was sitting there on my bicycle, just observing this, I went through the whole scientific thing of it cannot be this, it cannot be that, it cannot be the moon, cannot, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, the only thing that was left was, it's something else, but I also didn't want to get any closer to it than I was. Because it was just like, no, I'm not going over there. Yeah. And then it just all of a sudden just zoomed out. It just went from that size, to right down to zero. So,
Yeah.
well, things don't move that fast that we have. So I went, okay, good, all right. Who am I going to talk to about that one? Nobody.
Right. Nobody.
Fred, our time's running out a bit. I think we need to wrap up very quickly now. Sorry, Swami. There are others who would possibly want to have some questions for Toby. Do you? How about you, Ulf?
Yeah. Any questions about the mechanics of free energy? As far as I can see, that the methods being used to negate the effects of Lenz's law must be employed along with particular coil winding techniques that balance energy systems to make the free energy devices happen. So I think that's been the quest: is how do you get rid of the effects of Lenz's law?
Co-chair, Press, are you there, Press? Press? Pontus?
Oh yes, I'm
Yeah,
here.
you want to take over the Q&A session and go around the table? Or
Yes. Anyone else that has questions? Brian, come on.
I might state to Toby, hey Toby, thanks for keeping the memory of Bruce dePalma alive, and he did some great work, to be sure, and inspired me greatly in my pursuit of the unipolar generator. And I have to completely agree that Lenz's law is the great obstacle in trying to find ways around it, and I have significant research in this area. So if anyone, wants to travel down that path, they're welcome to contact me or look up my work on a segmented unipolar and counter-rotating machine. So
yeah, what's your website? Give out your website or your contact.
Yes. I have magvortex.org, and that's magvortechs.org. And just a couple of videos I have put online, and I have some better ones here in my computer I've never posted. But yeah, I've been into this a long time. I met Bruce a couple of times back in the late 1990s, and I spent dozens of hours with Adam Trombley that also convinced me to go in this direction. Had some funding in the 1990s. I got my first patent on a unipolar generator back then, but it had flaws that came to light, So I'm onto this new segmented version. I think it's really important to do this, to segment the disk and add a level of complexity and engineerability to it to amplify voltage.
this is Brian.
That's an older
Yeah.
there. Yeah, that's my stuff.
Excellent.
That's an older one there. You can see the magnet's not a solid magnet. There's a newer one there. I have a few videos there and some test runs of the device. I've got a successful interconnection of the segments, but I'm trying to build a device that handles much more current. I've got a trickling current through it now, but I need to build a machine that handles dozens of amps to test the higher level field effects that show up in the field analysis. The current path of the inductive machine is like a toroidal coil that's sliced like a bagel and counter-rotated while maintaining an inductive length of fixed length. So you're taking these segments of the discs, there they are on the right, that disc pair on the right back there, yeah, there.
This one?
So on the left, you've got a disc pair that are solid inductors, and on the right, there was a disc pair of what I'm trying to work with. Yeah, there.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
It's a complex machine, and the brush system is very intricate, but I have a proven fixed current path. So it's measurable. There are some side effects that were unexpected. I'm getting a pulse DC voltage of 4 to 5 times my predicted voltage on top of my predicted voltage. So
look at the pattern. Okay, good. Yeah.
That machine there, that's just a simple unipolar homopolar demonstrator. That one spent several years at Purdue University, and finally I got it back to them in pieces. And they never asked me to come explain it. Yeah, that machine there. So I have about 3 machines. And I welcome people to come take a look at these machines and test them themselves.
So if I understand correctly, this machine is defying Lenz's law.
Yes, that's the entire intention.
So basically, if you are able to do that, how come it's called a law then?
Well, that's because they never knew how to get around it. But it's a very vague law, and it has limitations. It's basically a 2-dimensional law.
Which makes it that makes it a principle.
Well, you can accept it like that, or you can look at it as an event that occurs in physics that's not well understood, because, you know, in induction, there's 2 different definitions of induction out there in the scientific community. The first one is for electrical engineers, and that's the Lenz's law one. It says you induce a current, and the second one, the wire and the secondary field interacts with the primary field in a way that resists the motion. But it doesn't describe the mechanism of that motion resistance. And if you extrapolate the field analysis to 3 dimensions, you can see pretty clearly the mechanism of Lenz's law. And then you can go back to the more basic definition of induction in the world of physics, which is that induction is the act of deviating the motion of a charged particle by a magnetic field. And that is to say that in this definition of induction, there is no input energy. It takes no energy to perform induction in this definition, because this is like a cyclotron. You can look up the machine called a cyclotron. In a cyclotron, you fire a charged particle into a magnetic field in a vacuum, and that particle takes up a circulation, moves in a circle in that magnetic field in the vacuum, and it'll do so indefinitely until it hits another particle or something. So in a vacuum, they fired charged particles in there, and those charged particles take up an orbit inside there, and that orbit's radius is determined by the magnetic field strength and the charge and the velocity. But this form of induction requires no input energy other than having a charged particle in motion in the presence of a perpendicular magnetic field. And so from my perspective as a researcher, I took a look at Lenz's law and I said, well, okay, you've got a primary field, and then you're moving a wire through that field, and that wire produces a current, and then that current produces a secondary field, and then that secondary field interacts with the primary field. Well, there's a lot of steps in there to get from induction to resistance of the wire through the field. And so by changing the, by doing a lot of field analysis on it, you can find that you can eliminate most of Lenz's law losses by having a different kind of inductive arrangement. And that this arrangement actually occurs in nature too. It's a model of the solar system, and it's a model of galaxies also. I believe galaxies, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to thank you for writing to me to express your interest in joining us in the R&D team. We certainly welcome you. You're most welcome to join the Monday meetings.
I appreciate that. You know, I'm fairly shy. I've been involved a long time, but I'm trying to get more traction in the field, let's say. So I'm trying to be more social in this respect. It was fun to attend the conference in Amsterdam. That was a great time for me.
Sure. Definitely. Right.
So I'd be happy to be part of your group. Sure.
Thank you for sharing what you've got there. And
That was excellent.
certainly we would love to have you with us on the Monday meetings, Brian. Thank you. Okay, I think that it's time to wrap up now because it's coming to 10 o'clock. And I suppose one last question is allowed before we wrap it up. Anybody else? Paul, Avin, our regulars on the Monday team? No? Pontus, Rest? Any last say?
I have a little experiment for folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to feel the field of energy between our hands. Okay, so if you take your hands and then rub them together and then pull them apart and then just bounce them, and then you feel the resistance, kind of like when you have two magnets, and rotate your hands a little bit, and then it feels like there's like a balloon of energy sort of thing in there. Okay, so in the distant healing practices, energy practices and stuff like that, what happens is we hyper develop this ability so that you can feel that energy over a greater distance. So then it becomes like you can heal somebody on the other side of the planet with this sort of thing. So where that energy comes from, all that kind of stuff, the collecting of it, the pulling it in, this is all, difficult to explain, but we're touching in on this here with that last presentation there of creating energy without energy being inputted.
Yeah.
A little parallel there.
Thank you, Swami, for sharing that. I think this brings to the end of this session now, the second session of the 71st FESIG meeting. And on behalf of FESIG, I would like to thank Toby for giving us such a thought-provoking presentation. And we hope you will return to speak at FESIG at some point as well. So since we've gone round the table and nobody wants to have any say on any unfinished business, I suppose this meeting is now adjourned to the next meeting. That will be the new year. This is the last meeting of the year. And the new year, the next meeting will be on the 8th of January 2020. Thank you very much, everyone. Namaste.
Blessings.
Oops.
Yes. It was fun joining this group. Thank you very much.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's
Okay, we can stop share. We can stop the recording.